Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. I am really excited about this one. I am really pleased to announce my new book. This is one that I put a lot of time into. It's been a real passion. I've had just a great time doing this book, writing this book, even designing the cover. This is my cookbook. I have been promising this, yes, I know, for about 2 years. I have finally completed my cookbook. It's called The Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking for Preppers, Homesteaders, Permaculture people, and everybody else. And it is really for everybody. You don't necessarily have to live like I do, okay? You don't necessarily have to revolve everything around the garden and, wild fish and game and all that. If your idea of eating seasonally is going to the farmer's market, or if you have a good grocery store that sources good meats and good vegetables from farmers, this book for you as well. This book is for anybody who really has a passion for food. The American diet, especially over the last 100 years, as I've said many times, it has shrunk um, incredibly. I mean, yeah, we have a lot more ethnic foods available than, say, folks did in the 1950s. But I can pick up my old culinary encyclopedia from about 1940. And as I've said before, it lists 100 varieties of apples you would expect to find at the grocery store and gives you advice on which of these apples to use for eating fresh, to make into pies, to make into applesauce, whatever. That at that time, you could expect to go to your local market and find 100 varieties of apples. Now you go to the grocery store, you're lucky if you can find four. You're going to have, Golden Delicious and maybe some galas and whatever, but a Macintosh, of course. But back then, you would have expected to find all sorts of apples coming in from all sorts of apple farmers that were bringing fresh to the market. The old culinary encyclopedia from 1940 or so would list just dozens of varieties of meat one could expect to find in the market. Now you go to the grocery store, and the American diet is essentially comprised of beef, pork, and chicken. That's it. Beef, pork, and chicken. Some turkey for holidays versus a luncheon meat. You may be, if you're lucky, your market may carry some frozen duck and goose, but it's not going to be very much. And maybe, around Easter they'll have a little bit of lamb, and that's it. Okay. Maybe a little bit of veal, which is also beef. But back then, you would go to the grocery store and there would be varieties of chickens, not just fryers, but there'd be stewing hens and there'd be capons and there'd be roasters and all that. You could still find that in some small grocery stores. Most places, it's just chicken. Chicken is chicken, right? Duck is duck. Well, 100 years ago, you would have gone in and there would have been a couple dozen varieties of duck. Fish, I mean, now what's probably the most common? Gordon's fish fillets, Miss Paul's, something like that. This which is actually decent fish if it's handled correctly. I mean, that's usually, whiting or pollock or cod. I mean, they probably don't use cod much anymore, but that's just really quality fish pre-bred and frozen. not so great. But if you went to the market 50 years ago, even when I was a kid going to fish markets, there were just dozens of varieties of fish laid out and shellfish and all that. And when it comes to produce, I mean, yeah, I used to be able to go to the grocery store and there'd be 3 dozen different types of tomatoes and at least 3 or 4 different types of cucumbers. You go down the list, squashes and all that, and greens. There were so many greens, and really, especially since COVID, that selection is shrinking more and more. I'm going to the grocery store so often now, and there are empty shelves. There's shelves that once had 3 or 4 varieties of, say, some vegetable in there, and now the whole shelf's filled up with one. And a lot of times they're just plain out of lettuce. I went to a local Food Lion grocery store the other day. They had no celery. I could not believe this is the first time in my entire life I've gone to a grocery store and there's been no celery. It was really interesting. I was listening to an interview with someone who grew up in the Soviet Union, and she said, I never would have imagined. She said, when she came to America from the Soviet Union, the first thing, and most immigrants from communist countries and very poor countries say this, when the first thing they see when they come to America is this incredible abundance in the grocery stores. They're just amazed. They get so excited about all these foods they never had. And she said, and now I'm seeing empty shelves. And now I'm seeing fewer things on the shelves. And she was really upset. She said, this was like my childhood in the Soviet Union. So, I think more now than ever, focusing on the great bounty, the great variety of food God has provided us that the earth will produce is so important because as those diets are shrinking, as we're eating fewer and fewer foods, we're also getting less healthy. We have an epidemics of heart disease, diabetes, cancers. The American lifespan is actually shrinking. uh, we are now going to live less. We're now living fewer years than our grandparents did on average. And yeah, there's a lot of factors in that. Sure, there was COVID and there's vaccine related injuries and there's fentanyl. 100,000 overdoses from fentanyl last year, mainly among young people. The murder rate is also off the chart. But still, the leading cause of death in America is medical error, malpractice, overprescription, and medical abuse. And that really does not even calculate in uh, the epidemics caused by bad dietary advice by the US government, like margarine, which is essentially poison, and a lot of refined sugar and corn syrup and all that, a lot of carbohydrates as opposed to meats and healthy, good fats. So I think it's more important than ever to really focus on expanding your palate, putting more foods on your table, whether you grow them yourself or you buy them from farmers. I've said many times, my great grandparents, with one exception, all lived to be about 100 years old. And now that's pretty rare. You don't find a whole lot of people living to be, 99 and 101 and such as that. And they ate the diets that our healthcare professionals now tell you not to eat. They ate plenty of pork. They had biscuits made with lard and slathered in butter. They had all kinds of wild fishing game. I mean, most of my family was in the coastal swamps in North Carolina, and wild game, fish, and all those farm raised products. This was, the center of pork production in the entire country. We ate a lot of pork. My great grandfather cured hams, and my grandmother made sausages and, homemade bacon and most of them smoked and or chewed tobacco. And if there was alcohol, which was certainly enjoyed, it would have been homemade. There was a lot of homemade liquor and wine, and everything the government now would tell you is dangerous and don't do. And these people fought wars, raised families of 15 and 17 kids, worked farms in the hot sun, and didn't get skin cancer. I mean, come on, something isn't adding up here. So yeah, that's a big motivation for this book. But a huge motivation for this book is really to convey to you my love of food and cooking. This has been my passion for as long as I can remember. I guess I have to blame my mother and my grandmother for this. My grandparents had a farm, basically a self-sufficient farm, essentially a permaculture farm before anyone knew what permaculture was, because my grandfather was a natural designer. He he grew up. His father had timber mills and built homes. So literally, when my grandfather was a child, he became an architect. He learned to draw up blueprints. He learned to build houses. He learned to be a brick mason. He could do plumbing. He could do electronics. He could fix any vehicle. I mean, the man could do anything. And he designed his farm. He was very influenced by Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. And he wanted to do sort of a smaller scale, but he was always looking at ways to make it more efficient and more productive. We had edible landscaping all over the place. I mean, he had his pecan trees and apple trees and pear trees and peach trees and berry bushes. We had a whole big thing of blueberries and all that. And then there was the kitchen garden, which would have been all the vegetables. And then there were fields where it would be corn one year and it'd be rotated out with other crops. Peanuts were the probably the big thing he grew was peanuts. Really, we had the livestock. There were chickens, there were pigs, there were cows, there were horses, there was everything. Guinea hens. Um, Ducks and geese. My uncle even had a pet alligator for a time, and of course, the whole area was surrounded by swamps, and it was only like 45 minutes to the beach. So wild fish and game was just a constant. And frog gigging, for instance. I mean, my grandfather loved to go out and gig for bullfrogs, and if you're Southern, you probably think that's normal. If you're Asian, you probably love frog legs. Most people in America have never tried frog legs, and they're absolutely delicious. They're a delicate, mild meat that is somewhere between, say, freshwater fish and chicken, a little bit of that flavor. If you fried it up and sold it, served it to someone as like chicken drumettes, they probably think it was chicken. And, that's something you're not going to find in the grocery store. That was part of our regular diet. And the meals we ate were incredible. My grandmother cooked for an army every day. And she would cook extra in case somebody dropped by because their house was almost like a community center where anyone who had any problem, I mean, family would drop in unexpectedly to eat, but people would come down the road just, they needed help. They needed a meal. And she would just, everybody was welcome. I mean, there was always abundance on that farm. There on the stove would always be a big pot of field peas and a big pot of butter beans, and there'd be corn and tomatoes, always rice, probably two or three kinds of meat, gravy, cornbread, biscuits. She would do, I mean, our family was part French, right? So, Julia Child said famously that before 1960, Americans didn't eat salad. We always had salad, or what they call it, crudité now. We always had raw vegetables on the table. And desserts. I mean, there would be pies and cakes and banana pudding and uh, cookies. And I mean, it was a feast. Every day was like a Thanksgiving meal for a large family, and Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter were like five times as much, with more people coming in and people that work for them, field hands and different things. Everybody, the table would be full, the kitchen would be full of people. There'd be people sitting in the den, there'd be people on the porch with plates in their laps and a big glass of iced tea. It was incredible. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. And I learned such a passion for food. As a 3 or 4 year old child, my grandmother getting me to eat collard greens and mustard greens, and I just fell in love with them. My grandfather taking me out in the morning with a cup of coffee. It was half coffee and half milk and a lot of sugar. And we'd go out and he'd either pick a pear and take his pocket knife and trim, slice some off and feed it to me, or a turnip, turnip root out of the field. That was one of my favorite things as like a 5 year old kid, maybe between the ages of 5 and 8, I guess, to go out in the morning with my dog and a cup of coffee and a turnip and eat it with a pocket knife. That was just like that was the coolest thing for a little kid. On the other side of my family, they owned small grocery stores, and so growing up, we were in a resort area of the mountains. Back then, it was really upscale. The Rockefellers were around. Walter Cronkite had a place there. Frank Sinatra would, I think he had a summer home there. If not, he came and visited someone there quite often. It was really, high end. The Colt family, Colt Firearms, they had a big mansion there. The Cone Mills Cotton family, they had the Firestones. They all had places there, and they had their private chefs, they had their private clubs, and they had their high-end restaurants. And my family had the only grocery store, so it was a incredible mix of the most humble, poor actually mountain people who needed the groceries they needed for the table, and would bring in fresh blackberries they had picked and fresh produce, fresh caught trout and such, and sell it to the store, who would then resell it. And that clientele, old men in overalls, were rubbing elbows with some of the most wealthy movie stars and industrialists in the entire world. Henry Ford, loved the area. He used to come up all the time. Of course, it was long before my time, but the Fords would come around every now and then. Um, but there were also professional chefs. There were European chefs. One of the people that lived there, who was a very big influence, was the Rombauers and Bushes. Irma Rombauer wrote The Joy of Cooking, and I can't remember if it was she or her daughter, married one of the Anheuser-Busch family. Um, yeah, it was the Rombauers and the Anheisers, not the Bushes. But anyway, they befriended my mother and gave my mother a copy of The Joy of Cooking, which is autographed and everything. And that was a big influence in our cooking. But we also had cheeses, imported cheeses from all over the world, imported wines, all kinds of canned items, and hams, and the specialty stuff was right there with the fresh produce, and the highest end stuff was right there with something that was grown, a quarter mile down the road, and that was fantastic. So from a very young age, I grew up eating kosher dill pickles from a great big barrel that sat in the store. Didn't even know what a commercial pickle was all about. Real sauerkraut, pickled mushrooms. I absolutely loved pickled mushrooms as a kid. So yeah, that's how weird I was and how different my taste was from everybody else. From caviar, very high-end fish roe, to shad roe, which was staple on the Carolina coast. The shad are in the herring family. They run upstream in the winter. And before the big, I think it was a PCB scandal, a water contamination scandal in the 1970s, shad fishing was a huge industry. And so I got to grow up with shad roe with buttered grits, and that's one of the finest breakfasts you'll ever have. Like I said, half my family is French, and there's a huge French cooking influence in my grandmother's cooking, in my mother's cooking, in my cooking. Somewhat similar, really in style of cooking to Cajun and Creole. We do have some Cajun and Creole ancestry as well. The Creoles, were a mix of French and Spanish and African that lived in the islands where they had sugar plantations. And at that point in time, England and France, especially, were always fighting over those islands. And then there'd be slave revolts, of course. A lot of times, especially during those turmoil, those times of turmoil, people would flee the islands, the Creoles especially, because the Creoles were the ones that really owned the plantations. They would often come to, of course, Louisiana. They have a huge Creole culture, but a lot of them came to coastal North and South Carolina as well. We had a very large influence here of Creole culture, just say around 1700 and before then. And a lot of them settled in that area, continued to speak French. So when the English ran the Acadians, the Cajun French, out of Nova Scotia, some of them didn't go all the way down to Louisiana. They didn't want to go all the way down around Florida and up through the Gulf. They stopped here in North Carolina. And then, of course, we had the actual common island culture. I mean, like Gullah Island off of Charleston, South Carolina, which is, a Black Caribbean, very French oriented people. And then, the island. So the island of Bermuda is actually just straight off the coast of North Carolina. And if you go down to the beach, sometimes you'll see cruise ships heading from Wilmington going to Bermuda and coming back. That was a major influence on North Carolina, especially cooking. Major trade route. In fact, one of the first settlements in North Carolina was Brunswick Town, and it was because the Catawban Indians in the area, the Native Americans, were bringing in all their goods to trade with the English coming over from Bermuda. And that was right. close to where Wilmington is today. And one of the stories I get into the book about is what is the origin of Brunswick stew? You know, Virginia claims Brunswick stew. Georgia claims Brunswick stew. It's essentially a hunter's stew that includes some Native American vegetables. And I think I make a pretty good case that it probably began in Brunswicktown, North Carolina, and that my family's probably been cooking it since, somewhere in the 1600s. And it's just a melting pot of flavors. But that Caribbean influence, that Creole influence, was so unique in my family because in the area where we lived, it was mostly Scots Irish. Now, my surname is Irish, and the other half, essentially, of my heritage is French, some English in there as well. So our cooking was actually very different than most of the other people in the community. We included celery and peppers, hot peppers. My great grandmother loved hot peppers. Her biggest trick she liked to play on the grandchildren, the great grandchildren, was to get us way out in the field, like a mile from the house with no water, and hand us a pepper and tell us it was a sweet pepper, not a hot pepper. Granny was a spitfire, as they say. She was an amazing cook. This woman made biscuits like you would not believe. And it was such a privilege for me to get to know my great grandparents. They were a mix of French and Scots Irish and probably a little Native American. And her cooking was amazing. My great grandfather, who was entirely French, he raised pigs and cows and kept bees, and he was the one that made the artisan hams and sausages and bacon and all that. And they were wonderful people, huge influence on my life. I was talking just yesterday with someone. They were remembering sitting there with their grandmother shelling peas, on the porch, and I thought, that's such a it's an iconic image, if you grew up in the South. And for me, it was the longest afternoons and evenings imaginable with my great grandmother and my grandmother, my mother, two great aunts under a giant live oak tree. They'd have big metal bowls and they'd be shelling peas or beans. And I'd be playing with a dog or two or three, and there'd be chickens pecking around, eating bean holes. And that's just something that's 100 years out of time now, and it's something I got to experience. So, also growing up in the mountains, half time, like I said, half my family was on the coast and the other half was in the mountains. We had so many Italians, especially. Some of my biggest influences have been Italian home cooks and professional cooks. One of the recipes I give in the book is for my mother's marinara sauce. She learned it and adapted a little to our taste from one of her best friends who was from somewhere up around Niagara Falls, New York, Italian American, right? The pizza that I learned to bake, that I bake pizza, I bake sourdough bread, all those recipes are in the book. Big influencer there was a guy from Rome that had a little restaurant that I got to know and learn. Another one was a chef from Mont Blanc. Another one was he's an Italian chef, a really great guy. He taught me a lot about sausage and combining it with eggplant and different things. He was the chef on the Love Boat. I mean, he was actually the professional chef on the actual Love Boat for a while. And he's from Italy, so big Italian influence, big German influence. We had so many Germans that lived in the area, so many Poles, a lot of Polish folks, so many Swiss. Yeah, I mean, the mountains of North Carolina were a big ski industry in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not as big as they once were, but we once had this entire alpine theme where every, house that was built up there and every business, if it didn't look like a log cabin, it looked like an alpine Swiss, ski lodge with all the cuckoo clocks. But so I got to eat just a ton of really good, diverse European food, really from that Alpine region of Switzerland and Italy and Germany and all that, France, of course. Probably late 80s, early 90s. A lot of Mexican and South American folks started moving in. They were getting work in the Christmas tree industry. So, I grew up with a lot of great Mexican and South American food. Dated two or three, Mexican girls from different regions when I was a teenager, and always wanted to learn their mother and their grandmother's recipes. That's for sure. And so that's a big influence. What I'm really conveying in this book is a passion for food, a passion for flavor. When I was 14, 15, I had a very liberal school teacher who convinced me to become a vegetarian, and I spent like 2 or 3 years there in my teens, like starving. I was hungry all the time, and as I've explained before in previous shows, the way I got into herbal medicine was meeting the Hicks family there at Beach Mountain, North Carolina. We started off talking about foraging for wild edible plants, and mushrooms, and fishing and everything. Because I always enjoyed being in the woods, and I've always thought the best thing about being in the woods or in the water is coming back with food. That was a lesson my grandfather taught me from day one. Whether it was all the edible landscaping he had planned around his property, or going down to the far end of the property to pick blueberries, or going to the beach to harvest oysters and fish. I mean, he was the one that took me out in the salt marshes and the channel and all that, and taught me to harvest oysters and open them with a pocket knife and eat them raw when I was like 5 and 6 years old. And, huge, huge influence. Gave me just an absolute passion for seafood and wild foods. I mean, the flavors are so much more interesting often. We think about the foods we often eat at the grocery store. Mankind has spent centuries turning the seeds of grass into sweet corn. I mean, the Aztecs, the Mayans spent centuries doing that. Say, for a European example might be carrots. Carrots were originally, at least dark. The wild carrot is brown. I guess when they began to grow it and cultivate it, they have started figuring out how to alter the colors. The orange carrot we know of is actually a fairly modern invention. It was bred in celebration for the Royal House of Orange. So when you actually grow your own carrots, you can get all these heirloom varieties, and you can have a rainbow of carrots of different colors and flavors, and each one of these has different word that's not coming to me. The colors in there actually have certain nutrient properties that can protect your cells from damage, from oxidative damage. I think was it last week? Yeah, I think it was. I was talking about a friend. He had macular degeneration, and he started eating all these colorful berries and um, heirloom vegetables and things he was growing from his own garden. And the eye doctors were just amazed that his eyes, the degeneration began reversing. So that's another example of why we need to eat, all these foods that are really diverse and good for us. But for me, it's always been the flavors. The wild foods have often more interesting flavors, often richer flavors, maybe a little more bitterness in the vegetables, maybe a little more richness in the meats. It's just different. It's just different if all you're used to is like grocery store chicken and pork, which has been bred to have less color in the meat and less flavor in the meat. Some reason want a very predictable and bland platform. Essentially, that's what the meats are almost portrayed as. When you think of a chicken breast from the grocery store, chicken breast doesn't have a lot of flavor. You take it and you turn it into chicken parmigiano, which is delicious, right? But that original chicken breast, if you just take it home and just pan fry it, let's say, or oven roast it, whatever. Put it in some means of making it hot and put maybe a little salt and oil in there. It's good. It's good, but it does not have a lot of flavor. The chicken thigh has a lot more flavor. The thigh of or the breast of a guinea hen that has not been improved over time will blow your mind. There was a time before we had a lot of labeling laws, not just America, but in Europe. And you may, if you know your history, you know that Italian Americans were often called guineas as a derogatory term. And that's because the Italian immigrants, when they came to America, brought with them guinea fowl. And they grew the guinea fowl as, the Americans were already here, grew chickens. They actually preferred the guinea fowl. And there's a reason for that. It actually tastes a whole lot better. I mean, once you get used to it, but over time, they wanted to become more American. And, you probably heard a lot of Italian families that wouldn't allow Italian to be spoken in the home. Well, they also began growing and raising chickens more than guinea fowl, and guinea eventually fell out of favor. Well, guineas are great to have on the farm if you can put up with the noise. They are very annoying creatures, but decades. When Americans would travel in Europe, they would come back just raving about the chicken they had eaten in Italy, not even knowing it was Guinea. But so, that's how much our flavors have changed. Our grandmothers would not even recognize the pork that's sold in grocery stores these days. The pork they knew was a reddish color and a much stronger flavor, a much more bold, a much more delicious flavor. When they started doing the whole low fat thing in the 80s, when they started pushing this boneless, skinless chicken breasts, the pork industry decided they needed to breed a pig that had a whiter meat, less fat, and less flavor. That's all there is to it. It's not necessarily a better for you. In fact, it's probably worse for you. The natural fat from a farm raised pig before it's been hydrolyzed and all that, that's actually pretty healthy fat. So is chicken fat. Chicken fat is called schmaltz in Europe, especially among, Yiddish speaking and Germanic peoples. And it's a very good fat. Actually, the healthiest fat you can eat is duck and goose fat. And Americans now eat very little duck and goose in our diets. Unless you're a hunter, you probably don't eat a lot of duck and goose, and it's delicious. It is some of the best meat. In this book, I tell you all about how to cook duck and goose meat. We get into everything from fancy French dishes like confit, just to simple fried duck breast, just pan fried, sauteed duck breast, maybe with a little pan sauce. But I go through everything. It's not an entirely wild fish and game book at all, by any means. It's like I said, it can be what you buy from the grocery store or a farmer's market. I have a chapter about foraging for wild foods. I really cover a lot about beef and pork and chicken, of course. I'll go into really a lot of detail on technique. And this is why I really do think my book is different, it's unique, and I think you'll find it very helpful. See, I don't want you to cook like me. I want you to cook like you. In order to do that, you have to have some very basic foundational techniques down. One, you really have to know your palate. You have to know what flavors you like. You know, it really is a shame, I will say, it's a shame that it's really since about 1950 or so, most cookbooks are recipe books, right? They tell you to use, so many spoonfuls of this and a cup of that, and this many ounces of this meat and whatever. That's not realistic. Essentially, what a recipe like that is what worked for one person on one day. Okay. Uh, yeah. Okay. Now, if it's baking, baking is science, cooking is art. With baking, you need exact measurements usually. All right. But with cooking, it's really much more important to understand how to combine flavors, the basic techniques of cooking, so that you can use what you have on hand on that given day. Most people will buy a cookbook to look at the pictures. I don't have pictures in my book. That's not what this is all about. This is a book about cooking. I tell the story of the ingredients. I tell you how these cooking techniques came about. I tell you what tools to use, what cookware, what knife, what fork, whatever, whether you should do it on the stove, whether you should do it in the oven. And then it's very much up to you. I give you an example of a recipe I would cook. It's much more important that you understand how to cook a steak than it is for me to give you a recipe of a specific steak on a specific day. And, your taste in sauce may be very different than mine. I'm not really big on commercial steak sauce. I prefer to make a pan sauce. There's one real exception, and that's if I'm doing little breakfast steaks, little thin steaks, pan fried, and I have them with some hash browns or French fries. Yeah, I want to grab some A1 sauce for that. I'm not fancy. But if I've got a nice steak, I'm probably going to either grill it or broil it or do a combination of the pan and the oven, but whatever, I'm going to have some drippings in a pan. Well, unless I grilled it, I'm going to have some drippings in a pan, and I'm going to add some butter to that, and I'm going to add some herbs and probably some bourbon. Most people would say use brandy. I actually prefer to use bourbon or wine. And really, one of the things I emphasize in here, especially regarding beef, is you don't have to buy all the most expensive cuts. You can make some of the best food off the inexpensive cuts, the tougher cuts that need longer cooking. I explain braising, which is essentially, browning your meat and then slowly simmering it in a gravy. That gravy can be a good brown onion gravy, or that gravy can be wine and garlic and or shallots and mushrooms. Same technique, two very different dishes. One of them is good, country style steak, and the other is, beef tips and wine or beef bourguignon if you really let it do a slow braise in the oven and all that. Well, you can do it on the stovetop too. It really doesn't matter. See, that's the other thing. I give you flexibility. I actually talk about all the techniques of cooking from cooking on a campfire or a grill or a barbecue pit to cooking in a modern kitchen. I explain how the oven developed and how you can, if you don't have access to something, figure out a way to make do with something else. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest traditions in my family is barbecue. I mean, like I said, when they came over from the island, they basically invented barbecue right here in eastern North Carolina. The oldest style of barbecue in the United States is the eastern North Carolina style of barbecue. George Washington even records in his diary that he had had such a huge feast of barbecue that he felt the need to do penance when he got home. I mean, we were pork people, and that's because the other big influence in this culture, of course, was the Scots Irish. Scots Irish were not allowed to settle at the nice plantations on the coast. They had to come inland to the swamps. And they came to a very wild country, and they very quickly figured out that they could just basically let their pigs roam in the woods. And the pigs would grow fat and healthy on all the wild forage. That's how they raised their animals for a couple hundred years, really. The people in a lot of parts of Appalachia were doing that well into the 1940s. So North Carolina has always been pig country. In my family, barbecue is like almost a religion. We do it the old-fashioned way. I take either a whole hog or a pork shoulder and I put it over hardwood coals of hickory or a fruit or nut wood, maybe some oak mixed in, live coals, low and slow, 10 hours minimum for pork shoulders, 20, 24 hours for a whole hog. Take the meat off the bone and chop it up with cleavers and dress it down with a hot, spicy vinegar sauce. It's not the barbecue that's sold in commercial restaurants. It is elemental, it's original, and it has so much more flavor. Then I also have, a lot of things that are just going to be a lot less intimidating for me. Roast chicken, roast turkey, all kinds of fish and seafood. I literally break down and detail just about every fish that swims in the waters of my region, and that would be, common for most of the United States. Up north they get a few varieties I don't have down here, but they get most of what I have down here as well. I talk about the best ways to cook sunfish and bass and catfish and trout. Talk all about salmon. Salmon is certainly not from my region, but it's one of my favorite fish. Perch, carp, even bowfin, which is a fish that most people have never even heard of. It's really unique, almost like prehistoric fish that shows up in our waters. All kinds of stuff. I get into white bait, which is something people don't even know about anymore. And it was once a really gourmet meal. Just like in 100 years ago or so, somebody might go to a restaurant and feast on tripe. Okay, tripe is an organ meat that people don't eat anymore. The Parker House, you've heard Parker House rolls, was actually made famous for their tripe. Our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, George Washington, they all flocked to the Parker House to eat their tripe, and the rolls were served on the side, essentially. Well, people stopped eating tripe and they just fell in love with the rolls. But white bait was actually usually smelt, but basically small minnows. People loved them. People loved them. I mean, they're still popular in Belgium, especially today. People will take these minnows and just gut them and deep fry them, and they eat them almost like French fries, right? Well, in early America, what they called white bait was just like the rage. You would go to the fanciest restaurant and get a plate of essentially what we would consider now fish bait. I talk about saltwater fish, eels and bluefish and red drum and black drum and fluke, speckled trout, sea bass, mackerel, spots and croakers, Atlantic perch, pompano, striped bass, cobia, sheep's head, red snapper, grouper. But then, I'm also giving points on tips on how to make really good hamburgers. I love a good hamburger. This really goes from like the high-end gourmet to the basics of country food. I give all kinds of great recipes for grits and eggs. I mean, I talked about all these different ways to make eggs, but yeah, grits, wonderful, Southern delicacy and how it should be made right. I get into some of our, like I said, more country meals like frog legs. I talk a lot about turtle soup and fried snapping turtle. Really great. And if you've never eaten it, again, these used to be the most high-end sought-after foods in the world, and now people just take them for granted. Of course, shrimp, crabs, and lobster and oysters, squid and mussels. I mean, it's kind of encyclopedic. But then, I don't leave out the vegetables by any means. I give cooking techniques and tips and good recipes, flavor combinations for artichokes, asparagus, avocados, all kinds of beans. I mean, there are like 50,000 types of edible legumes. I don't get into that many, but I give a lot more bean recipes than you can find anywhere else. Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, celery, chard, collards. I love my collard greens, and I tell you how to make them so they actually taste good. Corn, kale, cucumbers, eggplant, fennel, endive or endive, however you want to pronounce it. Kohlrabi, that's a neat vegetable, by the way. Kohlrabi is so cool, and it's one most people don't think of. Kohlrabi has a taste somewhere between an apple and a turnip. It's uh, it's really unique. Maybe a little bit of a little broccoli bittersweetness there, but it's really more, it's almost like an apple. It's so unique, and you can cook it, or you can make a fermented like sauerkraut out of it and blow your mind. Leeks, being part French, I absolutely love leeks. The alliums, the onions show up in everything. If you're going to learn two things about me in this cookbook, one, I put onions in everything that isn't sweet. Onions, leeks, garlic, shallots, you name it. Chives, garlic chives, anything in that family. Absolutely adore my alliums. And if I'm going to season something, it's probably going to be a mix of spices we call Cajun or Creole seasoning. I tell you how to make it yourself. No, I'm not from Louisiana, but like I said, my family has just really big, basically Southern French influence. So we do end up cooking very similarly. And one of my heroes as a kid was Justin Wilson. So I can't get away from my roots that far. I guarantee. Now, mushrooms, of course. I live in mushroom paradise. I use a lot of wild mushrooms, but I'll also tell you how to use the store-bought mushrooms, the button mushrooms. Okra, one of my favorite foods. I tell you how to make okra in a way you might actually like it if you don't like slimy okra. Tell you several ways. Onions, parsnips, peanuts, both raw and cooked. I tell you how to fry your own peanuts, how to boil peanuts. Like I said, my grandfather had a peanut farm. I know more about peanuts than Jimmy Carter. I guarantee that. Peas, all kinds of peas, from sweet garden peas to the field peas. Lentils, I probably missed that one. I love lentils. Potatoes, of course, tons of. When you've tried my mashed potatoes, it will change your life. Or my potato soup, or my French fries. I'll tell you how you can make restaurant quality French fries at home, even without a deep fryer. You can actually do this using your oven. I think that alone would be reason enough you might want to have this book because you cannot beat fresh homemade French fries. Radishes, rutabagas, even salsify, which is such an interesting vegetable. Nobody uses salsify anymore. It's actually sort of like a parsnip that tastes sort of like oysters, and you can kind of substitute salsify for oysters, but like if you want to stretch out an oyster stew or add more flavor and richness to an oyster stew, you can do salsify and oysters. A lot of options there. Spinach, I love spinach since I was a kid. Like I said, I was a weird kid. And, squash, sweet potatoes, tomatoes, turnips, and I love my turnips. I'm a turnip fanatic. Even talk about a turnip sauerkraut, which is very interesting and unique, different. Zucchini. I give my favorite eggplant parm recipe. Soups. I spend a lot of time with soups. I mean, soups and salads are like almost a daily thing for me. Of course, as an herbalist, I just go out and grab all kinds of vegetation, put it in a salad. But soups, we start with how to make real stock and broth. You don't make anything out of a can, okay? You can do the real deal. It's cheaper, it's healthier, it's better for you. It tastes incredible. Once you've made your stock, you can make consomme, you can make French onion soup, you can make anything, right? I tell you how to make my famous cream of anything soup, literally. We start with a roux. We add some milk or cream. We add some chicken broth or stock. I'll tell you the difference between a stock and a broth, right? Or it could be some beef stock or whatever. And then the vegetables. And you can make a cream of mushroom, corn, asparagus, spinach, whatever. Whatever. Cream of chicken. You can make a cream of anything soup. You can make it soup consistency or you can make it thicker and you can make incredible casseroles. You can make literally a casserole of any meat, fish, chicken, vegetable, whatever. These are these foundational techniques. Once you get those foundational techniques down, it's not a matter of, okay, here's a recipe. I need this many of that and this much of that and this to make this recipe. No, that's totally not what this book is about. It's looking and saying, oh, okay, I have these vegetables and this meat on hand, or this is coming in fresh in the garden, or Billy Bob down the street just killed a deer and he's giving me a deer roast. What can I do with it? Whatever you got on hand, you then use these techniques and the combinations of flavors to make meals you cannot buy. You can't anymore. I'm sorry. Cisco has destroyed the restaurant industry. COVID put all the mom and pop restaurants out of business for the most part. People say to me, I cannot tell you how many times, an ex-girlfriend of mine said this one time so plainly. She said, you eat like a king every day. And I said, yeah, I actually do, honey. But I eat for about 50 cents a meal. You would not believe what you can do with good quality ingredients and technique. Technique. And again, understanding flavors, understanding how to combine flavors. More exotic ingredients, like when I get into foraging, and I tell you how to use these, encourage you, and to look for ramps, ramsons, wild leeks, how to use dandelion greens, dandelion flowers. I'll say some more about that in a minute. Chicory, poke greens. I love poke salad. Nettles, burdock, docks and sorrels, nasturtiums, lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters are wild spinach, essentially, very easy to get into. Evening primrose, little shoots, red clover, cattails, like the entire cattail plant is essentially edible at one stage or another. It's a really neat plant. May apples, which are a really neat little fruit that we get around here in the spring. Sunflowers and Jerusalem artichokes, they're great. They're really great. Hostas, a common landscaping plant. The shoots of them are delicious. They're a lot like asparagus. And so are like, fiddlehead ferns and even jewelweed when it comes up very small. Daylilies, the daylily flower is great. If you enjoy like in a more high-end Italian and Mediterranean restaurants, they do a lot with squash blossoms. Well, actually, the daylily flower is more tasty and can be used the same way. Roses and violets, plantains, wild mushrooms. I talk about Yopon holly and Mormon tea. And wintergreen. These are some great teas you can make from wild foods. Then I get into how to do sprouts. I talk about some good survival strategies for the homesteader and the prepper, growing sprouts and microgreens for that period of time when you can put seeds in the ground, but they're not going to come up for a month or two, right? You're at the end of the winter, you've still got some stored food on hand, but you don't have anything fresh to eat. The sprouts and microgreens could honestly almost save your life. They have to be part of the strategy, really. Get into grains and pastas. Now, rice culture began in North Carolina and South Carolina. Well, it actually really began in South Carolina. I should qualify that. Uh, Spanish ship, Spain had they had the market. They had the monopoly on rice. Spanish ship gets in trouble off the coast of Charleston or Georgetown, somewhere in that area. The colonists save the Spanish crew. That was essentially tantamount to treason at the time. I mean, England and Spain were not friends; they were at war. So this was one of the first true acts of Americans acting on their own. They saved the Spanish ship. In thanks, the Spanish ship captain gives him a box of what we now call Carolina gold rice. That was essentially committing treason because I mean, honestly, if the Spanish government had known it, they would have hanged that captain immediately. The rice production begins the Carolinas, basically from Wilmington down to Savannah, Georgia, long before it ever got to the Gulf Coast. And by the 1600s, the English cookbooks are raving about the incredible quality of rice coming out of the Carolina colonies. Yeah, I love rice, and I talk a lot about how to cook rice. And I mean, rice cookery is so underrated these days. Rice is one of the very best things you can eat. I think it's, I mean, I don't think I can have a meal without rice, potatoes, and onions. You know, I'll take rice or potatoes. I rarely combine the two, but I got to have one of those and some onions. Seriously. Corn, give you a lot of great recipes for corn. I mean, corn's delicious. And look, if you're still boiling your corn, shame on you. Fresh picked corn. Fresh picked corn. Leave the shucks on. Roast it, grill it, slather it down with butter. It will change your life. It is the best thing. If you got some older years, make a corn chowder or make some good creamed corn. It's so better than anything you're going to get out of a can. I tell you how to do that. We talk about cornbread. We talk about all kinds of stuff. Get into wheat. I tell you some really good bread recipes, pizza crust. I give you my pizza sauce recipes. Other grains, oatmeal, barley, rye, a big chapter on fermenting, making all kinds of pickles. I mean, I give you literally, I say cornucopia of mostly pickled vegetables because, mushrooms can be pickled, but they're not vegetables, they're fungi. You can pickle fruit. I give you some pickled fruit recipes. We talk about pickled meat, pickled eggs and fish. These things were essential for survival for our ancestors. And they're really delicious. If you make homemade pickled sausages, oh wow, I'm telling you, you're going to want those every day. I'm serious. And good pickled fish, really, you take care with good fresh fish and good quality ingredients, and you'll understand why most people in Northern European countries, from the Ashkenazi Jews to the Dutch and the Norwegians and everybody in between, almost obsessed over cured and pickled fish. I mean, from gravlax to, I don't know, gefilte fish, right? I mean, it's just delicious stuff when done right. Into the fermented beverages, kombucha, kefir, dairy ferments from, buttermilk, sour cream, milk kefir, etc. Talk about kvass. Kvass is a really neat beverage. You can make it very inexpensively. My dear friend in Ukraine who was recently killed, she gave me her family's recipe for beet kvass, and I have to try it. Anyway, wines. I tell you how to make wines, country wines and ciders. Again, I got something to say about that in just a minute due to a question someone asked me. Beers, good sauces and condiments, dressings and dips. I tell you how to make all your own sauces, okay? From a simple white sauce or a bechamel to sauce espagnole. Uh, I mean, real legitimate French sauces, okay? To gravy. I mean, gravy is like a beverage in the South. I mean, I love gravy. You never make a gravy from a can. Never make it from a package. You're going to learn to make real gravy for pennies, and you're going to have it all the time, and it's delicious. Cheese sauces. I tell you about my salsa and guacamole recipes, my marinara and all kinds of good stuff. Salad dressings, from simple vinaigrettes to blue cheese dressing. I have a really great, basically copycat ranch dressing recipe that I kind of came up with that uses all kinds of herbs from the garden. You can get tons of herbal medicine in a salad dressing. Condiments. I tell you how to make mustard from scratch, from mustard seeds. Ketchup, a fermented ketchup that's so good. Hot sauces, all kinds of really good stuff. I'm not a big sweets eater, but I included a chapter on jams, jellies, and preserves, and a short chapter on desserts. Just a few things that I like that I think anybody can make. It's not a lot of high-end technique. Hardest part of it is making a pie shell, but with a little practice, you'll get it. I give you very simple instructions. You can make your own pies. So if you want to have a pot pie, a meat pie, you don't have to have sugar in the crust if you don't want it. You can't do that with a store-bought pie. They put sugar in all of it. It drives me nuts. That's actually why I had to learn to make pie crust, because I did not want sugar in my chicken pot pie. But then you can also add sugar, and you can make apple pie and blueberry pie and blackberry cobblers and who knows what else. And cobbler and pie are two different techniques. That's not important right now. But the other one that I really like is custard. I love a good custard, and I love good fresh eggs. I'm a big egg eater, and custard is basically a pudding that's made from eggs and sugar and whatever else you want to add to it. Really good, really good. And of course, I have to wrap that up with a few just classic Southern recipes. Homemade banana pudding. Oh, it's one of the best things on earth. Real banana pudding, especially with a shot of bourbon in there. Oh man, I'm telling you. And then bread pudding, which any homesteader or permaculture person who bakes a lot of bread, you're always going to have some bread on hand that you need to use before it goes totally stale. Make some excellent bread puddings, which were once, a favorite dessert in Europe and America. And then, of course, being Southern, I have to include rice pudding. Rice pudding was once a dessert for only the most wealthy royals of Europe. The common man could not get rice pudding. Now we wouldn't even, I doubt even 5% of kids in America haven't even had it. But once you learn how to make a good custard and you learn how to combine it with rice and some raisins and a little bit of rum, oh my gosh, some cinnamon and nutmeg, you're going to love it. You're absolutely going to love it. Like I said, it's about conveying a passion. It's about conveying a way of life, of eating seasonally, being more healthy because you're eating a wider variety of foods with a wider variety of ingredients and nutrition. But I also really want to emphasize in this book the importance of the table. I've talked about this many times. Family table is the center of the home. A feast is essentially the main act of worship in most religions. Food is such a part of humanity. And when we take it for granted by eating fast food and processed junk, well, yeah, that is self-destructive. I mean, I honestly believe, now don't be a glutton. Don't be like, the ancient Romans feasting until they threw up just to feast again. No, respect your food. Respect the life that was given for the food you're going to eat. And I mean that whether it's an animal or a vegetable. I mean, seriously, God put something on earth that you could eat, and when you eat it, you consume that life force to support yours. Take time just to enjoy the act of cooking. Take time to enjoy the people you're spending time with and feed them food that is a true act of love. And if you do that, you're going to have stronger families, you're going to have a happier life, you're going to have a healthier body. I don't know. Can y'all tell how excited I am talking about this? It really is a passion. It really is. It is something I enjoy so much. I am so very grateful that I was not raised shoving down chicken nuggets through a drive-through window. I am so very grateful to my mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, everyone that helped form my love and passion for food. From putting seeds in the ground and growing, a head of lettuce or something, a cabbage, taking those ingredients and combining flavors. It's creative. It's almost artistic. It's one of the most gratifying things a human being can do. And we have for far too long taken it for granted. And it's almost like it's become like, well, yeah, you're all chefy and you got to spend a lot of money and you got to follow these exact recipes if you're going to do it this way. And then if you're not going to do it that special way they write about in food magazines, well, then you're just, you're trash and you're going to live off of processed foods and fast foods. And no, no. In between is the mass majority of humanity that can learn a few basic techniques and really enjoy the food and build strong families and build healthy bodies and not spend a fortune on it. You don't need all those kitchen gadgets. You only need a few basic pots and pans, a couple of knives, a cutting board, a few basic techniques, a stove, an oven. Even that is optional. I literally tell you how you can dig a hole in the ground and make a good meal. Okay, seriously. That's the old-fashioned barbecue pit. So I'm not kidding. I just love this stuff. I love it. And that's what this book is about. And I am so excited to share this with the world. I just, even more so than my herb books, and you know how passionate I am about herbal medicine, I would just love to see this book turning houses into homes where food is enjoyed and shared, and families are strengthened, and people have a better relationship with their bodies, with their environment. I mean, I'm not the biggest environmentalist on the face of the earth, but I want clean water, and modern ag really not so good for that. Uh, People who keep a little flock of chickens in the backyard and have a little garden or can buy from local farmers who do things the right way are helping everybody. They're helping the farmer earn a living. They're helping the fertility of the soil by all that manure being turned into, natural fertilizer and vegetable scraps composted down. They're helping their community. What more can I say? Food is central to human life. And in our modern industrialized era, We have taken it for granted, and we've come to rely on chemically processed foods and pharmaceuticals to keep us alive. We're losing our humanity. Take it back. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to say buy my book and take it back seriously, because this will give you basically the confidence and the information you need to just go ahead and do it. You don't have to go to culinary school. You don't have to go work in a restaurant kitchen. You don't have to make something fancy. Seriously, you can make very basic food very good and tailor it to your taste and have fun. Actually, have fun doing it. So, y'all, the PDF you can get directly from me. You know, if you want an electronic copy, if you don't want a paperback copy or you don't need a paperback copy, on my website, it's on southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com, or my Substack page. $9.99 for the electronic copy. The PDF is 227 pages. Pretty good sized book. Paperback is unfortunately only available for Amazon. Right now, they're the only company that can do print on demand and guarantee they get something to someone for me in, a timely fashion. And it's $21.99. You can go to Amazon. The paper book, because it's formatted differently, is closer to 300 pages. You're getting a lot for your money, actually. I put a lot into this book. I put, 3, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week, for months writing this book. I demystify everything, as I do with herbs, as I do with everything. This is for the average person. This is for everyone. If you have culinary experience, you're going to just be thrilled. You're going to find some new ideas and you're going to have a good time. If, like, well, a lady that got in touch with me one time when I used to have a food blog. Okay, this is a little story. This is an aside. This lady, after talking with her, found out she had a PhD. She had a professional job. She was an accomplished lady, right? She emails me and says, she said, I love pasta. I can't cook it at home. I said, why can't you cook it at home? She said, every time I do, it ends up in this just big lump sitting at the bottom of the pot, all stuck together. And I was just absolutely perplexed. I could not figure this out. I asked her, do you do this? Do you do this? Do you do that? I researched everything I could about pasta, and then suddenly it hit me. I said, can you tell me when you add the pasta to the water, how hot is the water? What's it doing? What is the water doing in the pot? She says steaming and little bubbles rising. Okay, so boiling water is when you have big bubbles coming up and it's a rolling bubble. And when you put pasta in, it moves around in the pot. And she said, oh, I didn't know that. I thought this was boiling water. The woman had never learned the difference between simmering and boiling. So where I'm talking about a low boil, a medium boil, a high boil, no, she had no idea. She literally thought that when the water was steaming and the first tiny little, pin-sized bubbles started to rise, that was boiling. So her pasta was just going into the pot and sinking to the bottom and coming together. I fully understand that most of the people listening to this show will find that as just unimaginable as I did. You know how to cook. You know how to cook probably very well. But I'm telling you, I wrote this book so even a lady like that, I'm not disparaging her in any way. She had more education and makes more money in a month than I probably make in a year. But no one had ever taught her the basics. So in writing this book, whereas I give you recipes that you will find in some of the highest end restaurants, certainly in America and definitely in France and Germany. I mean, I have a passion for that kind of food as well. I also tell you how to cook rice. I go from the very most basic, how to hold a knife, to, you know, uh, fancy French sauces and all that kind of stuff like that. So anywhere you are on the spectrum, I think you're going to love this. And I mean, I am not ashamed to say this is a good book, and this is without a doubt my best yet. So I hope you'll buy this book. I hope you'll enjoy this book. Share it with everybody you know, and yeah, you're just gonna have fun. You're gonna love it. You get into this book, you're gonna love it. All right, so the question I forgot to answer. My friend sent me a question on for last week's show. How do you make dandelion wine? He says, I know you'll know how to do this. Well, all right, so let's start with dandelion wine. And like I said, it's wonderful. It's like sunlight in a glass. It's just so good. First thing is make sure that you're going to a clean place to get your dandelions. No pesticides, no chemicals, good and clean, not off the side of the road where motor oil might have gotten on them or whatever. You're only going to use the flower petals. You don't use the stem. You don't use the end of the flower. You don't use the white parts of the flower. They're very bitter. And you're going to need to pick a lot of dandelion flowers. So go to a nice open meadow and just start picking. Uh, I usually make wine in 5 gallon batches. That's because I use 5 gallon glass carboys for fermentation. So that's what I'm thinking when I'm putting this recipe together. Those are my measurements. I'm going for 5 gallons. If you're only going to make a gallon of wine, divide everything by five, obviously. So I would say probably probably 2 gallons of dandelion petals for 5 gallons of wine. That's a lot of dandelions, trust me. Now you got to remember that there's going to be space in between those petals. They're not like packed down. This is not. This is say 2 gallons by volume, not by weight. So literally, you're probably talking about a gallon and a half. I mean, if it was by weight of petals, like if it was really packed down. So I'm just going to take, a gallon size container, a bucket or whatever, and fill it up twice. To that, I'm going to add about 10 pounds of sugar. So if you're only making 1 gallon, divide that, by five. You're only talking 2 pounds of sugar. You can go a little more, if you want to. I wouldn't get too much more. We're going to put this in a pot with water, and we're going to bring it to a boil, and basically make a tea out of the petals, and dissolve all the sugar. It's that simple, really. Now you can add a lot of things to this. Okay, you can ensure better wine by adding a yeast nutrient. You can use a commercial brand yeast. You can even use what's called a yeast energizer. If you want to buy stuff and get fancy with it, you can. Or you can literally, once you've got it all dissolved, once you've let the flour steep and it's come to room temperature, um, let it do its own thing naturally. Literally, there are yeasts in the air that can colonize that. They will start turning that sweet liquid into a wine by eating the sugar and turning it into alcohol. That's iffy. 50% chance you're going to come out with wine, and a 50% chance you're going to come out with some kind of unpleasant tasting vinegar. You can also do things in a natural way by just taking a few more fresh flowers, because they will have natural yeast on the flower, and you can add that to the wine once it's come to room temperature. Yeah, it's probably going to give you about a 75% chance that you're going to have good wine. Honestly, it's that simple. Or you can buy a commercial brand of yeast. Now, this can be bread yeast, okay? You can literally use Fleischmann's or whatever instant yeast. It doesn't matter. But you're going to have a better tasting wine with a more predictable alcohol to sugar content if you use a commercial yeast. I have found the Lalvin, Lalvin wine yeast to be very good for wines made from flowers and fruits and such as that. Anything that's not made from grapes. Uh, it's not very expensive. You're talking maybe $1.25 to $1.50 for a commercial brand of yeast if you can find it. And these days, of course, you can order it online. So that's it. I mean, room temperature, pitch your yeast, put it in a container that can be mostly sealed, shall we say. Basically, as the yeast begins eating the sugar, it will begin producing both alcohol and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has to bubble off. Okay, so you can't put in a sealed container or it will explode. You will have a fountain of wine in your house. I have had wine and beer fountains before because my fermentation lot got clogged. That's not fun. Trust me, that's definitely not fun. Uh, if you're just starting out, probably the easiest thing to do is to get a gallon-sized jug, either food-grade plastic or glass. Cut this recipe down. It's the same amount of yeast either way. You don't cut the yeast down, but cut down the sugar, cut down the water, cut down everything. Fill it almost full, and put like the wrist end, the open end of a rubber glove over the top, or a large balloon, and secure it in place with a rubber band. As the mixture, the wort, or the wine, whatever we want to call this, begins to ferment, the rubber glove will inflate. That's it. You will know it's working because it's filling with air. If it gets to the point where it's about to pop, you might want to replace the rubber glove. Otherwise, you can buy a commercial airlock, fermentation airlock. This is a little plastic thing that inserts into the mouth of your jug with a rubber bung, is what it's called, that seals the air out. It's got water in the middle, so carbon dioxide can bubble out and air can't get in. You don't want air to get in because it can bring in the bacteria that will turn your wine into vinegar or other little bugs that can make it go bad. So, those are your options. I've come up with many DIY funky little airlocks over time using straws, various ways to plug up the jug, glasses of water, so the straw's sticking down a glass of water, it bubbles. I've come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. The easiest thing really is for a beginner to use a rubber glove and a rubber band. And you can do the same thing for making sauerkraut and pickles and such as that you want to keep the air out of. Let it go. It will ferment pretty strongly for the first week or so, and then it'll begin to slow down. After about a month, it should be pretty still. You're not going to see a lot of bubbling. At that point, you want to rack it, which means take the wine off of the dead yeast and sediment that's settled to the bottom. You will just transfer it to another jug and put another airlock on there. Rubber glove, airlock. At that point, even a cork would probably do because it's not going to produce a lot of carbon dioxide. You could drink it at this point, but it's going to taste a little sweet and rough. It's just not going to be smooth. But put it in another jug off of the leaves or the dregs, we call the stuff that's settled to the bottom, and age it for at least another month. And really a year is best, but a month to 3 months, every month it ages up to about a year, it's going to get better. After about a year, it can start to oxidize, start to get some off flavors. That, of course, after, say, 3 to 6 months, you could bottle it in small bottles and store them, seal them up real well, and store them in a dark cabinet in a cool spot. They could age for another 5 years. That's it. That's how easy it is to make wine. As I've often said, wine makes itself in nature because there's sugar in the juice and there's yeast on the skin of the berry or the flower or whatever. All we're doing is taking out the variables, and we're making sure that the yeast gets to colonize the wine and not an acetobacter or something like that. So yeah, that's it. And once you've made dandelion wine, you can make rose petal wine, you can make violet wine if you happen to have a lot. You can crush some blueberries or blackberries or grapes and go to town. Have fun with it. It's a great hobby. My grandfather did it. His father did it. It's something that's been in my family for a long time. And it's fun. Honestly, it's fun to make the wine as it is to drink it. I'll just put it that way. So y'all have a wonderful week. I hope you do get to buy my book. I hope you enjoy it. I'm sure you will. And again, I couldn't do it without y'all. I'm grateful for every minute I get to spend with you. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, for your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.